Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. We are recording, so then that way other participants can join and listen later. So welcome to Using Trauma-Informed Principles in a Non-Formal Educational Setting to Promote Thriving for Youth from Hard Places. My name is Jessica Sprain, and I'll introduce myself here in just a little bit, and I'll hand it over to my co-host.
Thank you, Jessica. Welcome once again, and please, take some time just to introduce yourself and what organization you're with in the chat, if you would, and and what you would like to hope when you read the title, read the little synopsis, what you hope to get out of this session. And then as you're doing this, we will introduce ourselves and why we're here today.
Perfect. And on that note, we just want to share with you guys that we are recording. So if you do have your video on, that you are consenting to the use of your image. If we do move into breakout rooms we do have our small group. We will turn off the recording specifically for the discussion section. So that stays within the group that we currently have. The other thing that we want you to do is to please listen to your body. So if you need to stand and move around, please do so. If you ate all your snacks because the lunch didn't fill you up, please go get more. If you have a fidget toy or a stress ball, please play with it. You might see me playing with mine as we go through. We all learn better when the needs of our bodies are met. So please make sure that you're listening to your body and do what you need to do as we go through this presentation. So yes, if you can please introduce yourself and what organization you are with in the chat, that would be great. And we will talk a little bit about ourselves, so you know who we are.
All right, I'll go first. I'm Brent Broaddus. I am a 4-H youth development faculty member for the past 22 years at the University of Florida in the IFAS, the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences Extension Department, and specifically with Florida 4-H, which is Florida's land-grant university's youth development program. We have offices in all 67 counties in the Seminole Tribe. We have faculty members in all those offices. In addition to 13 research and education centers throughout the state. For me, how I got into this, why I got into this, started, working with youth for the past 2 decades and starting to see some of the issues emerge, the anxiety, the stress, the not feeling that they fit, and started me down, trying to learn out more how to support them and keep them engaged so we can do the non-formal education that we do with them. But sometimes we've got to connect to them and build this trust to get to the education component, and was realizing there were barriers. And sometimes the barriers we knew about because they were disclosed by the parents. A lot of times started realizing that we didn't know what the barriers were. And, as we developed more, we learned it for positive mental health. And that led me to go into mental health first aid for adults and youth. So adults working with youth. I'm actually next month getting certified in teen mental health first aid. Both Jessica and I are TBRI practitioners. And from a personal side, that really pivoted my research component and my focus into this space of mental health was, I adopted from foster care about 3 years ago. We started our journey about 5 years ago, and lived experiences and realizing these things. And every day, including this morning, struggling with these type of situations really has opened my mind through lived experience on what it means to work with a kid from a hard place, to understand how communicating, trying to teach, trying to educate, trying to maintain a connection, a relationship is a massive struggle. And I knew and know what I was getting into for the most part through the process. But then I started applying and seeing some of these behaviors in the kids that I'm working with in my programs, and where I don't know these things, but I started trying the same techniques that I was trying at home. And the adoption, the trust, the connection that unlocked education and youth development flourished when we started looking at all the kids through this trauma-informed lens, because all of our kids have some form of trauma, whether they connect on an ACE score officially or not. Now all of them do. They survive the pandemic, so they have at least 2 ACEs. So no one's unaffected, no youth unaffected from an ACE standpoint. And then for my personal story, I'm an ACE score of 7, just so you all know. And that's a little bit about me. And Jessica?
So I am also obviously with the University of Florida, IFAS Extension, specifically with the 4-H Youth Development Program. I am a local county faculty member, AKA we call ourselves agents, even though it doesn't really describe our title in any way, shape, or form. It's what originally started over 100 years ago with the title, and they've stuck with it. So in theory, we're faculty and educators, if that makes things easier. So I am located specifically kind of in Osceola County, and then within that do some statewide efforts too. So the reason I started to kind of look into more of the trauma-informed programming and just trying to understand where our youth are coming from is that we are seeing a lot of our youth join us for programs, especially youth who we would say would be underrepresented in Florida 4-H. And they would come and they would attend, they would go through whatever activity or experience we had, and we didn't see them return. And I kept asking myself, well, why is this? We did our best. We're youth development professionals. We're doing these things really well. Obviously, there's places we can grow, but why are we seeing this? And as I learned more about ACEs and trauma, what I realized was we were not actually meeting the needs and creating an environment that we needed to for our youth who are joining us. And so that's really kind of started my journey into learning more and how to adopt some of trauma-informed practices into my specific programming. And then Brent and I are working on our statewide team to kind of educate our additional faculty and get this kind of developed in our statewide Florida 4-H program. So today I just want to share kind of what our roadmap is. We're going to quickly talk about what 4-H is, just so you guys have an understanding of where we're coming from. And we're going to talk about kind of the background, so our current setting for youth in our state. Many of you are probably already aware of these statistics, but we'll just make sure we're all on the same page. Then we're going to talk about brain development and behavior. So those are 2 of the things that are affected by trauma and ACEs. So we'll dig into that a little bit deeper. And then we'll look at kind of those implementation strategies and how to use a trauma-informed lens that we use specifically within our Florida 4-H or within our 4-H program. Our learning objectives for today are to kind of develop a knowledge and understanding of ACEs, which many of you probably already have. Understand how trauma-informed practices contribute to our positive youth development and thriving. And we'll talk a little bit about thriving here in a little bit. Within Florida 4-H, and actually within 4-H nationally, we do have a 4-H thriving model, and Brent will talk a little bit about that. So it's how we look at 4-H within the lens of having our youth thrive. Then then our next learning objective is understand and explain why understanding ACEs and trauma matter to our positive youth development professionals. And then learn practices, strategies that can be implemented to help youth regulate before and during educational programs. And then we're hoping you'll learn a little bit more about us, because we do exist across the state and we do love partners and would love to partner with some of you or the institutions or organizations you work with.
Thank you. So to begin today, we're going to do a little quick check-in, and we like doing this, with how are we feeling? And so we ask you to think about it. What zone are you in? Are you in a red zone right now? Are you feeling a little mad, angry during lunch? Did you read that email that just sets you off type thing? Because we all know when we're out of the office or at a conference, everything likes to go wrong because you're not there. Are you in the yellow zone? Are you feeling a little frustrated or worried? Are you really excited about something? Or you got the wiggly jigglies or something like that? Or, are you in the green zone? You're feeling happy, ready to learn, ready to go. Or has lunchtime hit you and maybe you're in the blue zone that you're feeling a little sluggish? Is it nap time? Do you feel a little sick, sad, bored? Be honest with yourself, when you're doing these check-ins, so you really know what you can do to help bring you back to where you want to be. Do you want to be in the green zone for this session or for whatever you're doing at the time? And so, look at this with a very honest, and there's no wrong answers. We all will experience some different zone multiple times throughout the day. So I always like to start with that. If you want to share it in the chat, you can. If you want to keep it to yourself, that's perfectly fine.
So I will share with you all right now. I'm functioning kind of in the yellow zone. I'm a little worried, but that's just natural anxiety presenting, right? We all have that. I am excited. I'm very excited to get to know you all and to present this material. And I might be at the point that I have a little loss of some control. So what I'm going to do is actually, this is if you were in the blue zone, but I'm just going to share with you, I'm in the yellow and the red zone. So if you're in the blue zone, so you kind of feel kind of sluggish, again, lunch is getting to you, feeling maybe a little sad today, the weather's not great, things like that. If you want to do this with me, this is an activity for kind of an upregulation to kind of raise your energy, your focus and attention. We can do some chair push-ups. For some of us, like me, who is in a chair that swivels and rolls, it becomes a little dangerous. So just kind of keep that in mind. So to do chair push-ups, you're going to put your hands on either side of your chair or your seat, and you're going to push yourself up. And so what this does is it just engages some of your muscles, engages your body to kind of get some of that angst out of your system so that you're ready to focus. And then I will pass it over to Brent for those of us who are in the yellow and red zones.
Absolutely. And so those that are got the wiggly jigglies or things we can do when working with our students or our colleagues, this works for adults as well. You know, if you need to do some down regulation, calm your body, calm your mind, get you focused to handle whatever tasks, whether it's education or a series of events or taking a test, what have you. So, you know, when we start with it's, you know, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. And so let's start with, you know, just look for 5 things that you can see in your environment. It doesn't matter what they are, just take a few seconds and identify mentally 5 things that you can see. Now I want you to try to pick out 4 distinct things that you can hear in your environment. Now reach out and touch 3 different items or surfaces that you can within your space. Then try to identify 2 different smells in your environment. And finally, can you identify anything that you can taste? And that's it. That's just a sample of a pretty easy down regulation where you start having them focus, calm themselves with things around them. You don't have to do anything special. You don't need any supplies. And even if, like, say, there's nothing they can taste, or, you know, they're tasting whatever's in their mouth that they had, or what have you, it's shifting their brain into a different center to bring them back so they can focus. And so hopefully some of these exercises helped you, whether it's an upregulation or downregulation, to bring you back closer to the green zone where we're ready to learn, focus, and be our optimal selves. And so next slide, please. So the little brief bit about 4-H, just so you kind of know, but how this can be applied to any youth serving organization, both in a formal or a non-formal out of school time setting, is 4-H is a non-formal out of school time youth development organization service, if you will. And what we set up is we try to develop you through the essential elements, the Thrive model, the 5 C's. There's a lot of youth development theories and models that we use, but that is the why. That's the ultimate what we're trying to do. We're trying to develop a young person, have tools in their toolbox to be their optimum selves and be most successful with whatever they choose to do in life and whatever life might inflict upon them. And we do this with things like the essential elements. You can see here there's 8 of them type thing, and we have different priorities and we have different impacts on what we call the 4-H formula. But ultimately, what we try to do is we use this experimental learning model in our, hands-on, learn by doing, as you hear a lot of that about 4-H. And you might have heard like a 4-H is about cows and agriculture. And we started back in 1902 that way, absolutely. But we've expanded into, if the kid wants to do it, we have a curriculum from one of our 109 land grant university network to cover that. So we pretty much do everything from cows to artificial intelligence development now in 4-H programmings throughout all the LGUs in the nation. And so next slide, please. And how this all kind of builds up is what we call the 4-H Thrive model. And so where we do all of our work as educators and with our partners, whether it's in the school system and after school clubs, or it's the YMCAs, the Boys and Girls Clubs, those type things, or even at your local libraries, or the ones we do at our offices or centers, is we focus in on the development of context, and that's the 4-H programs. And we start with the youth sparks. What gets them excited? Is it showing a cow? Is it flying a drone? Is it baking a cupcake? It doesn't matter. That whatever sparks them. Is it playing the piano? Excuse me. And we frame everything around them belonging, feeling that sense of belonging. Because when you feel that you're in a safe, secure, supportive space to be whoever you are, the world is opened up. You are open to all possibilities of exploration, developing that trust relationships, and having that. And we call it the YAP, the youth adult partnership, where they have caring adults that are not part of their family. And research has shown us that they need at least three caring adults to help them get on the trajectory to thrive. And the stats that came out, the last big one that was done was pre-pandemic in 2019, was 75% of our youth are not on the trajectory to thrive right now. They don't have those 3 supporting champions, is what we like to call them, that nurture their sparks and their interest and make them feel that they belong. And then obviously that leads to the engagement of them engaging in the programs, into relationships with their peers or colleagues, and finding people that not only are the same, but are different, but have commonalities, and that diversity provides comfort and strength and opportunities. And when we developed, essentially, in this nice little flower graphic, is the soil. This is what the youth grows into, and then they thrive up through this, and understanding, different things. As you can see here, we have different things we track: goal setting and management, positive emotions, hopeful purpose, a growth mindset, those type things. And then by developing the youth thriving in the social emotional kind of learning segment, it leads to these developmental outcomes. And this isn't one-off things. And 4-H is a dosage duration type experience, like a lot of our programs with youth are. So it won't happen within 1 4-hour meeting or something, but over time and over exposure to it does happen, and the research shows it. And then we get to these developmental outcomes, and we see the contribution to society. We see positive academic attitudes, and we're non-formal learners, so we're not trying to teach them specific content. Now, they learn quite a bit, but we don't track knowledge gain in any great capacity. We're tracking the youth development gain, their perceived abilities, their perceived comfort levels, and then ultimately that behavior change that they start expressing. Sometimes they don't know they're even doing it, but we as trained observers are seeing it and documenting it, those type things. And all that leads to these long-term outcomes, with obviously is long-term academic and vocational success, civic engagement, employability, and overall happiness and well-being, in a balanced mental health approach. So that's kind of how we use the Thrive model in our non-formal out-of-school time learning. But as you can see, this fits into, you might call it slightly different things, pick different things to track, but any youth serving organization, whether it's in a formal setting or non-formal setting, these things apply. And how we're applying a trauma-informed lens to make this even more impactful and reach more youth. We hope throughout this time together, you can see how it's a broad paintbrush that everyone can be a part of. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So a little bit of background, as we're well, that probably a lot of you know about some of this data and studies, but as you're aware, in the state of Florida, over 50% of youth have experienced at least one or more adverse childhood experiences, with over a quarter of them experiencing two or more. And then so we always ask ourselves, so what's this mean? We have kids that have ACEs, and so, but you think about what these numbers say, and these numbers coming back, from 2019, and so we have to what they're going to be now, because obviously stats and research are always lag behind, but over half our kids have experienced something: neglect, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. You had an intimate family member suffering from a mental illness or an addiction or a loss, incarceration, divorced or separated. So you think about that, just even this was pre-pandemic, over half our kids experienced at least one of those. A quarter experienced at least two or more of those. When we get our data in the next 6 to 8 months from the next published study of this, what's that going to look like? How's it going to change? How's it going to impact the need for us in this space to connect with essentially it's pace, but I'm forgetting my word, is protective factors. There you go. What are we doing? We are, whether it's 4-H or other youth serving organizations or formal learning in the school system, we are a protective factor. And that's how we help mitigate and work with these kids. So next slide. Quick review, obviously with ACEs, there are the potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood. They undermine our attachment to other humans, which also can lead into trust issues, brain development, and the ability to build relationships. And we're not going to go deep into the brain development level that I geek out in that, but how ACEs and these experiences literally break down connections or inhibit fundamental neurons and connections within the brain matter itself and these things. It is fascinating and heartbreaking how little a trauma can have such a huge impact in neural pathway development. But we'll move on to the next slide with that. And so this leads to having negative effects long-term on health and well-being. And ACEs are linked to chronic health problems, mental illness, substance abuse, early death. More ACEs one experience, the worse their physical mental could be, and that's what the CDC published in their latest study. As I shared, I'm an ACE score of 7 in my childhood. Well, that means I am 1,200 times more likely to have issues, mental health breakdowns, increased risk of suicide, substance abuse, all these things. Now, I have my share of issues like we all do, but I had quite a bit of protective factors that help mitigate. So yes, I'm an ACE score of 7, but what we do and how we interact with these kids with these protective factors mitigates that to where we don't have to be the higher end of what that score tells us statistically we might end up as. And that's really what that energizes me to do the work that we do, work with the kids we work with, is okay, ACEs are real. ACEs are everywhere. They're growing every single year in our youth. But what we do with our protective factors, we make the difference. We are the difference. And that is what really gets me excited. So they don't no longer are their ACE score. They are something so much better than what their ACE score could have led them to be, if that makes sense. And so, in case some of you didn't know, the acronym of ACE, came from a study by Kaiser Permanente from the CDC back in 96, 97, I believe, as part of the adverse childhood experiences study. And it was, this one was one of the, studies that included all races, ethnicities, income levels, education levels, and all communities. And I point that out to make sure if anyone didn't know that, because a lot of our youth development research that was done in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, they can't claim they did it with all audiences. And so a lot of the research that we've been basing our school decisions on, our administrators are basing our policy, our curriculum based on, don't account for studies that incorporated all the kids that are in our school systems. And so, just like anything, your research is only as good as the inputs. If you have complete diversity in your inputs, you'll have your conclusions will include complete diversity. If you put garbage in, you get garbage out. If you put limited or biased data in, you get limited or biased conclusions. But what I loved about ACEs is they were smart enough, even back in the 90s, where it wasn't as pushed as hard as it is now, be inclusive with all areas, all children, and how trauma affects them all. So we can see these results and we can apply them with that broad paintbrush. And then ultimately, we talked about, these ACEs, the trauma create the toxic stress, and that toxic stress can lead to those brain development that affects their attention, their decision making, learning how the body responds to stress, their long-term and short-term memory. It's amazing. And I will segue just, with ACEs and trauma and lived experiences, that I had to get to the point where I put cameras in the hallways of my house for my daughter, because I was getting infuriated with, why did you do this? I didn't do that. I would never do something like that. So I started putting cameras in the hallways and letting her watch the video of her going nuts and destroying things or throwing tantrums in the ground in the hallway. And I show her the video and she says, like, I didn't do that. There's no way I did that. Zero memory. It's affected the brain development where she doesn't have memory. And if she doesn't make a short-term memory of it, it never gets transmitted to long-term. Then you started applying this when we were, whether in the formal or non-formal learning, or teaching these kids, or we're trying to teach these kids these things. If because of some of their ACEs and their situation, they can't form any long-term, any short-term memory, to what hope do we have to make them long-term, where we're talking about behavior change or knowledge for testing or stuff like that. And it's just, to me, it's heartbreaking from a personal level, but as an educator, it makes me sometimes feel hopeless, but also it gives me the opportunity that, all right, we're going to go through and we're going to be this protective factor to help rebuild these pathways. But that also means sometimes taking a step back from before pushing content, you push a relationship, you push trust, you make them feel like they are in a safe, secure environment. And so we got the iceberg, and this graphic's been used to explain many different things of what we see above the surface and what's really going on below the surface. But both Jessica and I agree, we love this for the trauma effects and looking through the trauma lens, because early trauma can have lasting impacts on our young people's development and triggering delays and in coping behaviors, brain chemistry alterations. And it's, we know trauma affects the beliefs, the body, the biology, and the brain. And we're going to focus on the brain and behavior. Two things: one thing we can see, and the brain that we can't see from the development standpoint, mainly in the talks today. Next slide.
Okay, so we're going to dig into some brain development, and many of you have probably already learned this, so we'll just do kind of a quick review. So kind of to understand how trauma affects the brain, it's really important to understand how the brain actually develops. So the brain develops from the bottom to the top and from the back to the front. At birth, our lower brain is firmly wired, and it's responsible for keeping us alive. So addressing our safety, reacting to emergencies. And as the brain grows, it builds connections between brain cells in a more complex way that then sets a foundation for the higher level skills to develop in the upper brain. So we have our upper brain, and this is responsible for your emotional regulation, your understanding self and others, your logical thinking, your focus, your motivation, and adaptability. So these skills help us learn and do well in school and in life. So then what happens as we're building brains when we have our positive and negative experiences? So when we have good experiences, such as a positive interaction with a caregiver who meets our needs, a good foundation is built to support the further brain development. When we have negative experiences, like relational trauma, toxic stress, etc., the foundation of the brain development is weakened. So this is what can cause problems with self-regulation, logical processing, and basic human interaction, which is generally what we then see in our behavior, which we'll then dig into here in just a minute. So I'm going to go through this hand model of the brain, and I'm not sure if you guys have seen this before, but it's a really good way to kind of understand what we're looking at and how we can communicate even with our youth and with our families, how our youth may be acting or why we're seeing certain behaviors. So we're going to go through and talk about brain architecture. So we're going to talk about, as I said already, the upstairs and the downstairs brain. And so we're going to go through and do the hand model. So if you guys can all do me a favor, and you're going to hold your hand up like this, you're going to hold your forefingers up and your thumb in, and you're going to roll your fingers over your thumb. So this is your brain. This front part is what we would have as our prefrontal cortex. So this is our upstairs brain. So this is the area that's responsible for logical thinking, calming, flexibility, focus, etc., all up here. It's where we put language into emotion. So this is where the I feel comes from. So if you've ever worked with youth and you're like, what are you feeling? And they say, I don't know. They may not know if they have not been able to develop that prefrontal cortex or had that foundation, the firm foundation from the lower brain, which we'll talk about here in a second. Then I want you to lift up your fingers. And this is your downstairs brain. So this is kind of where your brain or your palm and your thumb are. So these areas represent the limbic system, and they're responsible for keeping you safe by watching out for danger, which is kind of what we call the watchdog. So watching out for danger. And it produces strong emotions such as anger and fear. So the thumb itself is the amygdala. So again, this is more of your watchdog, but it belongs in your lower brain. And this is where it takes in information from other parts, and then it reacts through your lower brain, keeping you safe through fight, flight, or freeze. So this is your amygdala is what's going to cause you to fight, flight, or freeze. So one thing to note is that the lower brain or downstairs brain is responsible for your tense emotion. So if you've got the child or the youth that is having that tantrum, that is where our lower brain is kicking in. So what happens is when we're functioning in our lower brain, our upstairs brain is not working. So we do what is called flipping our lids. And we do this as adults. When I get frustrated or I'm fighting with someone, most of the time my spouse, which is not appropriate, but we all do it because we know at the end of the day, they will still love us. I flip my lid and I am solely in my downstairs brain. We don't have logical conversations. I start saying mean things. I start saying things that I know will hurt the other person and potentially hurt our relationship, but I have no filter because I am not logically processing through anything because I have flipped my lid. Now, once I calm down, then we can have an actual conversation. So now my upstairs brain and my downstairs brain are connected together, which is what we would call a fully integrated brain. And we can start having those logical conversations because I have now engaged my upstairs brain. So this is very similar to how when youth suffer from toxic stress caused by relational trauma, there are negative effects on the developing brain. So that's where we see changes in that lower brain that Brent was kind of talking about. And we get this weaker brain structure because there are less neurological connections. So it makes it harder for our youth to connect from their lower brain to their upstairs brain. So as a result, youth suffer from lower emotional control, which is, we see that a lot in a lot of our youth, lower learning ability and behavior control. What happens is their amygdala is working overtime to determine their safety. So they're constantly down here making sure that they're safe and trying to keep themselves alive. So it's harder for them to reach those connections in their prefrontal cortex where they can be logical thinkers, where they can learn, where they can process emotions, things like that. Most of the time they're spending their time down here. And if the brain stays this way for too long, it actually changes its focus completely kind of to that survival brain. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll give you guys an example here in a minute. But what we would call is like a weak staircase is being built between the downstairs and the upstairs brain. So we're going to take our brains and we're going to go for a walk. We've got our whole brain. It's a nice calm day. The sun is shining. There's a nice breeze. You can hear the wind rustling through the leaves. You're relaxed. So you've got your full brain connected, your integrated brain, your lower brain and your downstairs brain and your upstairs brain. As you're walking, you turn a corner and you see a bear. The first thing that happens is the amygdala senses the threat and sends off an internal alarm. At this point, you flip your lid. So you've gone from logical thinking to 100% emotion. The amygdala is telling the body to fight, flight, or freeze. In this case, many people would run. And this is the response that keeps us safe. So after we run away from the bear, maybe we're back in our car, we start to think with our upstairs brain. We're starting to calm down, and so we're connected to that upstairs brain. We think through what just happened, and our body starts to relax again. So in that situation, we flipped our lids to keep us alive. So that's an appropriate way that our brain functions to get away from the bear. Now, in contrast, we're going to look at another situation where the brain has experienced or is experiencing trauma. So in this scenario, you guys are all going to be second grade students. You're lining up to go to lunch. As you're walking to get in line, your fellow classmate runs into you. Since you're experiencing trauma and toxic stress, your stress response cycle is on high alert, and your amygdala senses a threat and immediately reacts. So that means your brain is generally functioning like this, mostly functioning in your lower or downstairs brain, using your amygdala quite a bit. So what you do is you flip your lid. So this decreases any connection with the upstairs brain, and you move into your survival state of fight, flight, or freeze. So as a result, you punch your classmate. So in this scenario, there was no visual danger present, but there was a perceived threat of safety for you, the child. From an outsider's perspective, there is no need for you to flip your lid. So in this case, in the past, without a trauma-informed lens, we may have said that this child was just defiant or angry, just wanted to hurt their fellow classmates. But using a trauma-informed lens, what we're looking at is this child is actually just trying to survive. That was a natural reaction for their brain in that moment, because that's where their brain normally is functioning. So we realize that there may not be a strong connection between that lower brain and the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain. So that's why we're acting in that way without that logical thinking. So also on that note, if somebody came up to you in that moment and said, why did you hit your friend? Or why did you hit the other student? When you're in that emotional brain, that student probably can't give you a reason why. Or they might say, because they ran into me. And for them, that is a legitimate reason to have, in this case, fought back to try and keep their brain kind of in that survival mode. So now that we've kind of discussed the brain development, we're going to look at the behavior part. And again, this is back to the illustration that Brent shared with us. The behavior is really what we see, and what's kind of under all of it is those beliefs, changes in beliefs, changes in the body, biology, and then, as we just talked about, the brain.
So what we see, and as youth development professionals, we normally see the effects of trauma in our youth in the form of lower emotional control, lower learning ability, sensory processing challenges, lower confidence, self-esteem, and extreme low behavior control. And this becomes because, as Jessica was talking about, it forms weaker brain structures, or that staircase is non-existent or missing quite a few planks to get up to the upstairs brain to access some of those other centers for regulation and logical thought and coping skills and processing um, stimuli and so forth. And so instead of developing that stronger structure, focusing on thinking, reasoning, impulse control, and relationship development, they're not able to do that, or they're not able to do that in any way that then they can transfer into long-term memory. Just think about like the example. I'm a very open person sharing with what we're dealing with my daughter. We process after every event, but if she's not out of the flip the lid state, if she's still triggered, she'll have no memory of what we've talked about or why that was wrong or how she could have handled it differently, or when I have her redo a situation the right way. If I'm having her process too quickly, she can't remember it. So then it never changes behavior. It never becomes a new pathway that is developed to help her increase her behavior control, help her be more confident in her skills. Because, and I'm sure all of you have experienced this with some of these kids that you have worked with, they know there's a disconnect. Sometimes they can't verbalize it, or they don't know why, but they know something's wrong. And it creates a negative feedback loop as we're trying to develop and get them to a stable mental health platform, that they know something's different. They know they should do something different, but they don't know why. They don't know how, and they don't know why they can't remember what we talked about last session, or last time it happened, or what have you. And it just keeps bringing back that doubt, and it keeps them in that downstairs brain where they're not feeling connected. They're not feeling safe within themselves, within their core. Next slide, please. And so, this will come as no surprise. We generally see these negative behaviors when a child has a fear of abandonment or hunger or being unfamiliar with the environment. They feel out of control, or they receive too much sensory input, or do not receive enough sensory output. This may, be manifested in hitting or kicking, yelling, running away, melting down. What we see quite a bit is they will revert back to an age where whatever's triggering them occurred. So, for example, if something happens and it triggers an ACE or a trauma that occurred when they were 3 years old, they will mentally snap back to a 3-year-old abilities. And that might manifest as throwing a tantrum. That is, in the case of my daughter, Emily, happens quite a bit. And she's rolling and screaming on the floor. She's 12 years old now. But in that moment, for that time, she can't process more than a 3-year-old. And when in a school setting, think about this in classroom management and working with these kids. How do you're in a 7th grade class, and all of a sudden you got someone, because the air conditioner kicked on and that sensory input triggered them, and now they're a 3-year-old in a 7th grade class, and you've got a faculty member trying to manage that classroom with someone that's having a mental health crisis and can't remember, can't think, can't rationalize, because even if their brain was connected and they come down from flipping their lid, their mental age is 3 years old still. You can't reason with the 12-year-old like you would anyone else in that class that's not triggered. But are our faculty members, are they prepared to manage a class as watching a kid act like a 3-year-old, and they have no ability to stop themselves? It's horrible. It's a horrible position to be put in, especially for an untrained person. And that's where we start putting in this trauma-informed lens so they can understand how to manage your class, your students, your field trip, whatever the relationship is, and having plans and a structure and support ready to move in to secure, comfort, bring back. But also you got to worry about all the other students. I mean, you can't stop everything and focus on one student for the next 30 minutes of their 45-minute class period. But have we set up that system, that structure in place to help those those adults that are put in those situations with those kids. And you never know, that AC system could have turned on 500 times during the school year. But it's this one time that sound reminded this kid that the air conditioner kicked on the last time someone in their life beat the crap out of them. And it just like that, they've lost their control. They flipped their lid, and we've got to find a way to bring them back in a safe way without causing long-term damage, making the trauma worse, without trying to punish. We talk about quite a bit in this. You need to connect before you correct. You can't go in with the stick when you're using a trauma-informed lens. The stick does not exist in a trauma-informed lens. You connect first. You find out to the best of your ability what's causing the behavior and what the need is. Do they need to have felt safety? Do they need to get food in their system because their blood sugar dropped? They can't express that, and they just know something's wrong, and now they're scared and they think they're going to die. All because their blood sugar dropped, because it makes your body feel woozy, for example. So next slide. And then, just an example to give you all these things. And we have a table of handouts with interpretations that you all will have access to. But disobeys instructions. All right. Who has not had a kid that we're experiencing? They are just being a pill, and their mission in life is to disrupt my class right now. And it doesn't matter whether they have had trauma or not. We got kids that are doing this sometimes just for the fun of it. But anyways, that's not always the case. What they might be trying to express is they don't understand all the sounds and words that are coming at me. And it could be you're talking too fast. Or a lot of our kids that have trauma, they have auditory delays. And essentially they hear all the words, but they can't process them at a certain speed that you would think developmentally they should be able to. And so who has not experienced all of a sudden, I'll use my daughter again because she's full of great examples. This happened about 8 months ago. She was in English class, and I get a call from her teacher, extremely upset. Your daughter is in the middle of my English test making pterodactyl sounds. And I'm like, okay, did you follow her 504 plan? Did you remove her from the class, put her in a safe corner, and let her come down into where she can start? No, I told her she needed to stop making pterodactyl sounds. And she kept doing it until the 5th time I told her. I said, okay, did you do a safe touch on her shoulder that you're authorized to do as far as this 504 plan, so she can process that auditory in a priority setting? Because we process as humans multiple sensations at a higher order than single. So words get processed at a certain order. Words with a safe touch, that's 2 sensory inputs. That's the higher chain. Your brain processes that first. So what happens is she hears, Emily, stop making pterodactyl sounds. You're disrupting class. But it took her brain 5 times of that before she heard the first one. In her mind, she reacted the second she heard the teacher tell her, stop doing what you're doing. That's inappropriate. But in the real world, outside of Emily's brain, the teacher said that 5 times to the point where she called me on the phone. By the time she recognized and registered the first auditory command. Now, not every kid that comes from a hard place or has trauma issues is going to have auditory delays, but a lot of our kids do, because you think about what's causing some of these ACEs, the abuse they're getting, whether it's verbal or whatever. They're trying to protect themselves. The brain is shutting down. It is slowing down the process of information because that information at full speed is hurting them. It is making them want to crawl in and stop being present. And that's what we got to remember when we're looking through a trauma-informed lens. They're not going to hear the words that come out of your mouth at the same rate that you're saying them. Something's happened. You can't treat them like nothing happened and expect a nothing happened response. So that's just one example. And you'll have a lot more in your handouts and your matrix and your guidebooks that we're going to give you. So I believe next slide is we're going to give you about a 5-minute break. So use this time to stand, get more water, in my case, Diet Coke, because I pretty much mainline caffeine. that way. If you need snacks, meet whatever needs your bodies have. Check some emails. Hopefully they're not frustrating, but we'll see you back at 2:25. And thank you. So what we like to do is after every time we give our students or other educators breaks and trainings, we always like to come back with a check-in. What has changed since our last check-in? So, are you still in the same zone you were in? Are you still in a different zone? Did you go up? Did you go down? Did your blood sugar drop from lunch? And now, you're getting the feels that you need to do something again. And so we always just like to bring everyone back, and this helps with students especially quite a bit. If they're feeling, they need a little upregulation. Jessica loves to do her little mini dance party. Jessica, if you want to lead them in that.
So this one's pretty easy. It's much more fun that way. Because right now, doing a mini dance party and standing up, you would only see my middle section, which was not great for everyone. So if you guys just want to if you feel like you need to do some upregulation, you're getting tired now that lunch is kicked in, just have your own little dance party, listen to the music in your head, whatever. When you're doing this, obviously with others, you could definitely play some music. You don't want to do it for too long because you can get people way too upregulated, we'll say. So just do it for a quick little bit, do a quick little mini dance party if you're kind of sitting in that blue zone and want to get back to the green.
Absolutely. And if those that that they did the unthinkable, they checked the email and it's made them mad again, and they're in the red or yellow zone, and they need to come down a little bit to another regulation exercise that we do that's effective is box breathing. And so where we'll just we'll breathe in for 4 seconds, we'll breathe out for 4 seconds, breathe back in for 4 seconds, and breathe out for 4 seconds. And we won't go through it. Normally we do it in the rule of 3. So you would do this 3 times, and that usually puts at least enough to downregulate them one color zone. But once again, easy things. You don't need a bunch of gadgets or tools to do it. But a note here is you in a classroom setting or a setting with other adults, you might have people needing different things. Some might be in yellow, some might be in blue. And so you don't want to make everyone do, what we tend to like to do is try to, cookie cutter approach. Everyone in the class, let's have a mini stretch party. Let's do a little mini dance party. Well, you might just be setting yourself up to have a much more difficult time in classroom management by doing it. So you need to give your audience the opportunity to say, those that need down regulation, that are in, that are yellow or red, I want you to box breathe like this. And those that are just feeling sluggish and lunch has hit them, I want you to get up and jump up and down for 4 seconds or what have you. But don't be afraid to allow simultaneous needs to be met. It might be counterintuitive. It might sound like classroom chaos. And for maybe those 4 to 8 seconds, it could be chaos. But you will bring your class, your learners back into a zone to have a better experience than trying to make them all do a dance party and then they're all going to box breathe together. Because what you've done is sometimes you'll flip-flop your students and put them in a different zone than they started in, and you'd have to almost down regulate again, which just wastes more time. But with that, next slide, please. All right.
So to continue our discussion, we're going to look at a few practices and strategies that you can implement to meet the needs of youth. And these are actually strategies too. It looks like we've got a couple of you guys who are joining us as school counselors, or just looking for tools to help support families and youth that you work with. These are things and strategies that you can do not only one-on-one with youth, but you can also be doing this or encouraging families to do this. All of these ways we're going to talk about meeting different needs can be done in almost every setting. So when trying to meet needs, we want to start kind of with our physiological and ecological needs. So our physiological needs are our biological needs. So they're there to sustain our life, along with our sensory motor needs. And we also have our ecological needs, and it's what we need to get from the environment around us. So providing for basic needs such as water, food, and a safe and structured environment, meeting the need for physical activity, teaching regulation skills can all help meet these needs. As we work through this section, I want you guys to kind of think about ways that we have tried to incorporate some of these into just our session so far. And also, while we're talking about meeting some of these needs, what we're kind of looking at, especially within our 4-H world, is that we don't know the stories of the kids that are coming to our programs. Some of them we may know because we've gotten to know them over multiple years when they've been in our program, but we don't normally know their backstory or the environment that they're coming from. And so by meeting these physiological and ecological needs, we're actually meeting needs, hopefully before we start to see the behavior. So these are just good practices that work with youth and adults. You can, again, as I said, do them in one-on-one settings, or do them with a group of people, or parents can even implement them too. So there are a few easy ways to meet those physiological needs. The number one thing is hydration. Hydration is essential and easy to provide. So the brain needs hydration to process appropriately. Dehydration causes mental or cognitive performance to deteriorate. So providing water with youth when they arrive to encourage their brains to function at the top of their game. And we want you to avoid anything with caffeine because it can actually increase anxiety and hyperactivity, which is not what we're looking for. But this is something you can either have a couple bottles of water in your office that you can share with your youth, encourage parents if they're picking up kids from school or getting them off the bus to have that bottle of water right away when they meet them. And in addition, help them to address their blood sugar. So this is also very critical for both obviously youth and adults, but we need to eat something every 2 hours. And so that's why when we started, we encourage you guys to have some snacks with you. And we want to make sure that we keep our blood sugars level. Just kind of keep in mind, at least in the world that we work in, many of our youth and families are running to appointments or meetings or things like that. They're all over the place. And so they don't necessarily always have time to grab a snack or think about grabbing a snack or food. So we just encourage having a few options that our youth and adults can kind of pick from. And when we're looking at foods, we like to offer multiple different types. So looking for that sweet and kind of chewy foods can generally be calming. Whereas if you have your spicy or sour and crunchy, they can be alerting. So to kind of offer both options, again, you don't have to go too in depth. Sometimes what we'll do at different meetings and stuff, and especially if we were doing this in person, we'd have different candies on the table. Candy can be used as a good thing. It's not always something to shy away from, but we'd have things like cinnamon or mints, or we might even have a Jolly Rancher. So it'd be something that you could kind of pick based on what you're needing or feeling in the moment. So just something to note, though, when you are providing snacks, and especially when we're in our group settings with our youth, is that for many of our youth, they've experienced food insecurity. So some youth may ask for more multiple times, and we generally try to encourage it as much as possible. They may also not eat the snack at the time, but pack it away and take it with them. And we always encourage that too, because for some of them, they just want to know that they have the security of some food later in the day if they do need it. And also, if we do have any leftover food, we do try and encourage our youth who would like to bring it home with them that they are allowed to. We just want to just kind of be flexible, allow, seconds or thirds, just because we don't know what's happening with our youth at home. So just always trying to remember to have some water and some snacks available really helps them kind of regulate and meet some of those physiological needs prior to seeing some of the behavior. Another way to meet physiological needs is through physical activity. Within 4-H, we do this through icebreakers and different activities. We've noticed a lot lately, and I think it's getting better now because of COVID, and people have realized that we've been sitting around and not really moving around as much as we used to. But in 4-H, I've seen a lot of especially our volunteers pick activities or icebreakers that don't involve a lot of moving around because it's easier and there's not as much space. But what research is showing us is that we do need to have that physical activity, obviously for health, but just to kind of reset our brains and reset our bodies. So it doesn't have to be something major, like we don't have to do running, we don't have to do jumping jacks. It could be something just very basic, standing up and stretching. You don't need a lot of space for that. So that might be another thing too, if you guys are meeting with youth or families, maybe encourage them to just take a quick break to do something quick for physical activity, just to kind of reset everything. The other thing too is to kind of meet those sensory needs. So many youth who have experienced trauma do have challenges with sensory processing. And many of you, for those who are counselors, probably seen this quite a bit, know this. But a few tools that we'd like to provide are Play-Doh, stress balls, fidget spinners, pipe cleaners. If you are in that one-on-one setting, or especially with our families, provide a small weighted blanket or any of our stuffed animals that you can squeeze or hug. Velcro is also a nice tool because you get the satisfaction of pulling it apart and bringing it back together. I do encourage, obviously, if you are going to have those sensory tools, that there are some ground rules for using them. And so those ground rules are set prior to either handing them out or having them available. If you see me moving around a lot, it's because I am playing with my stress ball. I didn't realize, I was like, well, I don't need a stress ball. How does this relieve stress? In theory, it probably does, but it's just a nice thing to kind of fidget with. I have learned that I pay attention more and do better when I'm actually having something in my hand. So encourage, especially your youth, if you're meeting with them one-on-one, let them have something in their hands to play with. It might help them, process and communicate with you better. Another way to meet physiological needs is kind of what we've been doing when we first started, and then after our recent break. It's kind of looking at that regulation, doing that body check-in. You can manage experiences, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors this way. And you can do upregulation or downregulation depending on where the youth is at. I just popped my stress ball. Let me get a napkin. So the key with kind of the regulation part is, you guys, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it's an activity called an engine plate. And this is something that you can use and you can Google it. There's lots of different options, but it ends up being a plate that you have the different zones on. So red, green, yellow, blue, however you lay it out. And you can describe different examples of how those feelings are. So very similar to how we do kind of our check-in, and have youth, especially if they're at home, maybe they're just getting home from school, right when they get home, have each child check in on their engine plate, say, how are you doing today? How are you feeling right now? And so we can kind of gauge where they're coming from, so we know how to meet some of those needs. So do we need to do something that's calming, or do we need to do something that provides a little bit more energy for them? So it's something you can either, as a counselor, maybe post in your office, and each youth that you meet with, have them kind of identify where they're at. Encourage your families to have them created at home. There's multiple different ways to do it, but it's just a good way for us as adults to know where our youth are at. And then we can also help provide tools for them to be able to regulate their own emotions. Another way of meeting, start over. So just another couple examples of upregulation. I know we've done two. One could be running in place for 30 seconds or bouncing a ball as fast as you can. Bouncing the ball, I encourage more from a home setting, depending on the situation. Then a couple other activities for down regulation, definitely stretching, and then that belly breathing, making sure we're breathing all the way in with our belly and we're releasing all the way through. There's lots of resources online. You can do different mindfulness techniques, different types of yoga with kids, things like that, to be able to provide that up and down regulation. And I've noticed they're great tools too for families to kind of look into that.
All right. I want to go off script here just for a second because I like to keep things lively with Jessica. If you could stop sharing your screen, I want to share some pictures just to bring home some of the points that you brought home from real examples. Let me go to, here we go. So this is my daughter Emily's room. This is what we found on her bed. We have to check once a month. Just 2 months ago. So this was under her bed. These were under her bed. Oh, good fun stuff. Box. We took this one downstairs, but she had a box of stuff also on her bed. And I'll stop sharing now. And you can bring back the PowerPoint, Jessica, please. But I show you that because, once a month we have to check. And it took us 9 months in therapy with her to figure out why she was doing this. And we, at the house, I practice these things with her just like I do with the youth and the adults that I educate in my professional life. But we have snacks, and whether they're salty and sweet or sour or chewy or what have you, to meet whatever needs where she is on the check-in type thing. But she would hoard the food. She would sneak it to her room and not eat it then, but eat it later. I mean, this stuff's laying out in the pantry. I mean, there's not even a door on our pantry, not because of her, but our dog broke it down when we first moved in and I never fixed it. So there's no door on our pantry. But literally, there's no barriers to get to any of these snacks in our house. Yet she still felt the need to hoard the food and secretly, and I don't know if she's doing it during the day or at night or whatever, would eat the food and then not even throw it away, just hide it under her bed. And longest time we could not figure this out because we know she has full access to food here. She will never ever have a food issue, but it doesn't matter. In her mind, she's still back when she was in a group home at 2nd grade. Her caseworker never signed her up for the free meals at the school in Hillsborough County. She was in a group home in Hillsborough County at the time. So the school gave her a cheese sandwich every day, all 2nd grade. That's all she got to eat was a cheese sandwich. Way to go, the system failing our youth. But so what would happen is her friends at school would feel bad for her because she'd only get a cheese sandwich. So they would give her their snacks and their pudding cups and whatever they had to help her get a meal. And so she still, to this day, has that ingrained that she needs to hoard food and snacks in a room to eat because she doesn't know. And it took 9 months for her to tell us this story, and how she feels that she never knows when we're going to decide that she's only worth a cheese sandwich again. And that's all she's ever going to get once a day. She's now in 6th grade. This happened in 2nd grade, and to this day, she still hasn't been able to form pathways to know she's always going to have food now. She's still locked in that trauma imposed by our system, supposedly, making it better. And so I just bring that up example on how it can manifest and how what can happen doesn't get fixed very easily. And it sometimes it'll never get fixed. But just one of those examples of what happens when you offer things, what they're going to do with it, you just never understand, never know. And that's why sometimes we get limited resources, and they don't have to be, like I buy Chewy bars and Swedish Fish and stuff like that. They do not have to be high priced things like that by any means. But having that free access, because it makes them, once what we're going to talk into this, get to that felt safety. And look at that transition. Didn't even plan it that way, but it worked out. But in addition to the psychological needs that Jessica just went through, we also have to address the ecological needs through the adaptation of the environment. And a few ways to address these are providing a safe environment through felt safety. And remember, feeling of safety. Trust is built in this. And providing a safe environment is something that many of us do. I mean, all of us, we know when they are in our care, whether it's at a school site or an after school site or what have you, we know they're safe. We know that nothing's bad's going to happen. Their needs, their basic needs are going to be met. So we know we're providing them a safe environment. It's clear as day to us, and it should be clear as day to everyone, right? But if they don't feel safe, even though they are safe, it doesn't matter. They're not making the connection. So that's where we have to meet them where they're at. And when we work with these kids, along with the activities we conduct, we have to think about the environment they're in. And is that environment connecting to their needs of felt safety? And once again, it's not going to be a one size fits all. So you might create, a safe corner for this that might have a beanbag chair and a curtain type, where it's they're present, they can see through it, but they have something in front of them where there's a barrier so they can feel a little more safe if they're having problems. That's just one example like that stuff. My brain completely went dark on that one. Oh yeah, yes. I know I was going to say. I want to go back to that we know they're safe, but they have to feel safe, and that's the big disconnect that I find a lot of us. When we first are getting into this, it's just like so logical. We know they're safe, but how can they not feel it? And that's a much more complex question, and people get PhDs and why that works. And I just don't think we fully understand all the neuroscience of what trauma does in that. But there are many situations where us knowing and them feeling, there's this gap. It's like the Grand Canyon type gap. And so felt safety is something that, as people that manage the environment, and it could be the intensity of lights, or if you have the ability to turn lights off in one part of the room and lights on the other part of the room type thing. But we have to create the environment where that youth can develop the trust. And with that trust, we build the relationships. And with those relationships comes felt safety. It's more about a feeling than it is about physical safety. And that's really hard for us as institutions. Don't get me wrong. It is extremely hard for us to somehow, once again, we can't cookie cutter everything, but our whole system is based on cookie cutting our kids in formal education and non-formal education systems. So next slide, please. And so what are some things we can do? And another way to do some of these, meeting these needs is, making things predictable, whether they realize it or not. And I think we've all seen this anecdotally, working with youth more than a hot second. They respond well to structure. Too much structure, they will rebel and purposely try to be little brats. But lack of structure, they will actually lose control and not know why they're losing control, because they don't feel safe, even if they're coming from a lower end of the spectrum of trauma or not. And so creating an agenda and following it, they knowing what's coming next, whether it's in a syllabus, whether it's on the board, what have you, that structure provides a sense of felt safety, whether they mentally know that's what's happening or not. At the beginning of the meeting, reading over the important parts of the agenda, such as, starting with an icebreaker in your snacks, or if you're if you're an after school club and, they're kind of simulating a business meeting or report outs or something like that, or discussions, and then we'll, at the end of this activity, this will happen. And sometimes it's very helpful even to provide the agenda in advance to the parents, so they can go over with the child, okay, at school today, you're going to experience this, or, tomorrow you're going to go on a field trip and you're going to go here. So you're going to get on the bus and then you're going to get off the bus and you're going to get on a boat and those type things. Predictable environments that show consistency and when they can expect transitions. And then, try to maintain that rough outline, that structure, similar agenda for similar activities. Topics and activities are changes. Think of it like as a puzzle piece. All puzzles, well, most of the puzzles now, because now there's round ones and also, but traditional puzzles, pretty much a rectangle, right? And you build the frame. All right, keep the frame, but you're putting in different puzzle pieces for every event, activity, subject matter. Excuse me. But it provides that structure that helps with felt safety. This creates rituals. Therefore, when they come to your class, come to the program, they know what to expect roughly each time. And so there's not the unknown. The anxiety drops. The cortisol levels drop. And it makes a world of difference in how that youth will experience the next segment of their life. And sometimes they're running segments, and they could be 10-minute segments. They could be 15-minute segments. They could be hours. They're rarely more than an hour, in all honesty, at most of the ages, even in high school. But sometimes 90 minutes is the longest segment of direct attention that we see in some of our high school youth. But that is outside of the bell curve for the most part. And then obviously the value of meeting needs and providing transitions from one activity to the other, like, whether it's a 5-minute or 60-second warning. All right, we're going to wrap up in 60 seconds, reading time. And now we're going to move to craft time or what have you. You figure it out with what works in your situation. But it's important of meeting that predictable environment. And then the same thing moves into the sensory needs with, temperature, light, and noise. At the meeting location, are the lights too bright? Are they too loud, too hot, too cold? And a lot of this, as I'm well aware, as most of you in the school system, temperature control is the bane of education existence. I mean, we have zero control over it. And if we're just praying it might work most of the day and not break down. And I mean, that's just the reality of it. But what can we do in our individual rooms to try to mitigate when the things we can't control? We try to control what we can control. Is it a backup fan? Is it some kind of noisemaker to replicate some of those things? Because it may not be necessarily the temperature that would trigger them. It could be the lack of hearing the compressor going. It becomes white noise, kind of like, I don't know if you all do it, but I sleep with a fan on even when it's freezing cold. I just turn the fan away so it's not blowing on me. But the white noise of the fan, I can't sleep without the white noise of a fan blowing. And the same thing happens as you get, you're in a classroom and your AC is running or you're in a portable. There becomes routine sounds, just like usually when you first get a new appliance, a refrigerator, every time it kicks on, you hear it. But eventually you don't notice it. It becomes background noise and it doesn't draw your attention. 6 months later, you're like, oh, I don't know if the fridge kicked on or not, because it becomes part of your normal sound environment. And so be thinking about things like that, and things that we can do. We can't control the temperature, but we could encourage them to bring sweatshirts or hoodies or dress in layers or something like that, to where we provide the opportunity for them to make those adjustments in things that we can control, because as we all know, there's a lot in institutional settings that we just have zero control over. Next slide, please. And so disarming fear, meeting our psychological and ecological needs is a great place to start, and can be done relatively easy with a little bit of pre-planning and intentionality. But the next step is to help disarm the fear that many of our youth are feeling. And sometimes they can express that they're feeling this fear, or it might manifest as an anxiety or butterflies or what have you. Sometimes they can't. They just know something's off and they can't describe it. And there's a few ways we can do this when appropriate and when possible. Be silly and laugh and play games. Like, for example, once again, I'm going off script to drive Jessica crazy. Sometimes when especially during the pandemic Zoom meeting, I will change backgrounds every once in a while I'm teaching, just to try to, what do y'all think about this one, or stuff like that. Or I'll flip to, I'm a competitive barbecue person, so I'll put up a thing, who's hungry now? Those type of things. Or, I'm a Star Wars geek, and so I always have Star Wars backgrounds too. But sometimes in the way I adapted in classroom, I would have cat in the hat hats and funny things, or put on my science white coat type thing, or what have you, to break it up. But in Zoom, it's a lot easier, the backgrounds. But things like that, for examples, once again, disarming the fear, letting them be okay to have that brief sense of laughter, bring in some good hormones to help calm some of the ones that might be causing that anxiety, that fear, those disruptions, and try to disarm before it becomes a problem, so to speak. And so this, once again, is all done to set up the framework to allow that development, that knowledge transfer, that social competency developments that we're working for. And also it helps to build that trust relationship that this adult, this caring person, means no harm. And they can be trusted in that moment of play, of laughter. And it doesn't have to be long. It could just be if it becomes, once again, a predictable part of the routine, throw in a little bit of that. It builds that layer of trust and stuff like that. And then validating feelings. As adults, we sometimes have a bad habit of providing justifications for everything we make a youth do. For example, if a youth sad, we might say, you'll get over it. Or, I loved it when I was growing up, and we don't use this very often. When you're hurt, you say, I'll rub some dirt on it, you'll be fine. Not great help, is it? And I don't know if I actually rubbed dirt on it and it made it worse, because I was a literal kind of kid at the time. But the sentiment is the same. We know, or they just got the crush of the day, just dump them. Their life is shattered, and we know it's no big deal because they're going to have a new crush next day. It's going to be okay. There's going to be a new hot boy girl of the month jumping in, but to them, their world is devastated. So we want to be cognizant of validating where they are right now, and those feelings they're having are okay. Their feelings are never wrong. Feelings are never wrong. They are what they are. How we respond to them and how we control those emotions, and we don't let those emotions control us type thing, that is where we're validating and focusing on the positive in our developmental journey through our trauma informed lens. When appropriate and when there is safe boundaries, we want the youth to be able to express and feel their emotions. And sometimes that can be done in a more of a group setting. Sometimes, once again, setting the environment where they have that safe space to do that. And so things like that, ultimately focusing on the positive and validate, but helping them move on, whether it's just in the moment, okay, I understand this, how you're feeling right now, but right now let's focus on this task, and we can come back to that later, or we'll, those type of things. And so once again, it's combining some things of transitions and other things, but helping them transition to focus on a positive to keep them moving forward after your validation. So we don't have to stay there, and we don't have to have a mini therapy session in the middle of class every time, someone's having a crisis because, so-and-so, made fun of them. Kids are mean. We know this. It's going to happen. Validate, focus on the positive, keep the flow going on whatever you're trying to do. But it's important, as we're focusing on the positive, to use the positive phrases in the contents. You've almost got it. Good try. So if they're struggling, on a math problem or getting a concept, or if they're in art class and shading is just blowing their minds, they can't get the shading of the apple right, what have you, and then you can also reinforce good behaviors. That's great eye contact. Thank you very much for that. When I said, everyone look up here, that's good listening. I'm so happy you are here today. Just like we learned in this conference, that welcome. Just imagine if every time a kid all the kids walked into a setting, a learning educational setting, I'm so happy you're here today. Thank you so much. And use their name, whatever it might be. Little things, takes 4 seconds, can set up great success for that episode, that training, whatever you're trying to do. Next slide, please. So, like we are talking about different phrase instructions, using positive words, and opportunities to provide control. So maybe, we've all done it, whether it's with your kids or the kids at your programs. Don't run. Think about that. Take 4 seconds. Close your eyes. Don't run. What's the first thing that popped in your head? Probably someone running, right? Maybe we used to be saying, remember to walk. We're now putting mental images with the auditory response of the behavior we want them to do. It's the same thing. We don't want them to run, but what is going in their mind? Run. They're going to think about running because that's the word they hear. Or remember to walk. They think about walking. Just little things like that. And then provide opportunities for youth to exercise control appropriately. I call it in my teaching, everyone at every stage of their development deserves their own sandbox. How big that sandbox is depends on your structure, your needs, their abilities, and the rules of your organization. But there is no place where a youth can't have some level of control in their sandbox. And that does wonders for their felt safety. They're in control of something, maybe not a lot, but they're in control of something. Look for those opportunities to provide that control for them. And then when allowed and needed, youth take breaks and choose to participate at different levels if that's what they need. So maybe they're not fully engaged. Is there something they can do that still keeps them partly engaged until they're ready to fully engage? These are, once again, take some intentionality, thinking in the structure and the agenda and the goals of what's happening in your educational management of your classrooms. But look for these opportunities. They're not as hard as people might think, and it doesn't derail the overall lesson plan or the overall goals. It actually helps you achieve them in a higher success rate than coming in with the Thor hammer of over strict goals. You will learn this, you will regurgitate this. This is what we must do today. You still can meet this is what we must do today, but give them a little bit of control, give them a little bit ways to maybe partially engage that will lead them into further engagement with felt safety. The end result will always be greater than the more authoritative approach when looking at kids through a trauma-informed lens. Next slide, please. So additional practices, we're going to talk about the opportunity to lead, refocusing our lens and giving full attention. And so, giving youth an opportunity to lead an exercise. This can, and we do this very well in both formal and non-formal learning, calling on a student to read this passage, solve this problem, answer this question. And it's as simple as that, or it could be if your schools, some of them still do pledges in the rooms. A lot of them are doing it over a central PA, but, if leading those type things, or once again, within the classwork or the body work, we do that very well. But it helps to reinforce that child's feeling of value. But make sure it rotates. It's not the same kid every single time, type thing. Stop and give your full attention and use eye contact. One of the best things we can do to build trust as a caring adult, to connect to a child, because we don't know what baggage they're dealing with. We don't know their level of trauma. But we can be rest assured there is some level of trauma. They are dealing with some ACE, guaranteed now. There is no way around that. That giving that eye contact develops, that unlocks, this person cares enough to even look at me, to see me. Because a lot of times, a lot of these kids at home or by their peers, they're never seen. They don't feel they're being seen. They're not even looked in the eye. And so it's a simple gesture that can mean a lot to building that trust relationship for our kids. Now, there's going to be some kids that might not feel comfortable with eye contact for reasons. And so you will learn that very quickly. And so you never force them to look back at you, but you offer that to them. That is your gift, your full attention. How they reciprocate or not is where they are in that trust relationship zone or development. But it's also very key if you can see it's making them uncomfortable, you don't push it. You just back off and you try something else. And then, we want to work on rethinking how you see behavior to help meet the youth's needs. And so an expression of needs, think about they may be communicating through their behavior. For example, the behavior can express a need for felt safety or belonging, sensory needs are need to be met, the need for connection. I think we miss some of these behaviors. All they're trying to do is connect. We see it as, negative seeking attention, and it is. But why are they seeking this thing? And because they don't care if it's positive or negative, but they know negative gets them the attention that they're wanting. And it's not really attention, it's connection. But we all know if I am going to be the class clown disrupting the room, I am going to get attention quicker than if I am politely trying to raise my hand to get the teacher to connect with me so I can let him or her know I know the answer. And so and be starting to think that we don't always start. The first thing that doesn't pop in our minds as dealing with our kids is negative behavior is willful disobedience, but an attempt to communicate. Not saying we don't have kids that are trying to be snots. Okay, that is going to happen. But what we're trying to say, when you start going through a trauma-informed lens and thinking about these things, that should not be your first thought. They're not being a disobedient on purpose. What are they trying to say? And then you go through some of these things and find out, to the best of your abilities, with their response to your responses, what is it? Is it a need that needs to be met because of this behavior, or is it they're just trying to be a snot and they need to be appropriately addressed within your hierarchy system of progressive discipline? Next slide. I believe Miss Jessica's up with cool QR codes.
Okay, so the next thing we're actually going to do is an activity. And you can do it via a worksheet that is provided, or you can just kind of work along with us. So there is a QR code on the screen. Feel free to use that QR code to pull up a folder. This is a Google Drive folder. And in that folder, you're going to find a worksheet called Trauma Informed Lens Practice. This will be kind of what we're working off of. Now, if you, depending on how many windows you want to have open at a time, my recommendation would actually be to pull up the resources, which would be the behavior interpretation table and the trauma informed practices checklist. And the reason for that is we will have kind of the worksheet prompts on the screen here, but you'll want to use those other two resources to kind of help answer the questions. Now, again, the questions, you don't have to use the resources, but we just want to make sure that you guys have access to them. And if you don't want to use the QR code, I should have already put this in the chat. We do have, nope, that's not the right one. Let me pull up the right code, the right link. I will put a link in the chat for you. Nope, wrong one again. Technical difficulties here, but the QR code should be working the best. There we go. Let's just click on it that way. Perfect. Okay. Use that. Perfect. Okay. So if you guys have access to the resources, what we're going to do is we have, this will be the worksheet. So the trauma informed lens practice. What we'll do is we'll walk through a scenario, and we're actually going to walk through scenario 2. Scenario 1, you guys can use if the scenario works for your environment, or you can modify the scenario however you want. But the two resources are the behavior interpretation table, and this was actually created by Dr. Karen Purvis and Dr. David Cross, along with Wendy Lyons Sunshine. They are the authors of The Connected Child, and if you have not read that book, I highly recommend looking into it. Dr. Purvis and Dr. Cross have also founded and created the trust-based relational intervention, I believe is the I. I'm blanking right now. But it's TBRI. So Brent and I are both practitioners. And what it means is that we can offer trainings based on their curriculum. And the curriculum foundation is obviously using kind of that trauma-informed lens to build connection and to address needs and behavior. So this is just something that they had put together. It's a prompt that goes through when a child does this, they may be trying to express X. And all of these are in draft form. The reason for that is because I have not gotten full permission to share this from my institution. So I just wanted to let you guys know, but you do have access to them. There's also the trauma-informed practices checklist and planning worksheet. There are 2 documents on this one, but the main one is the checklist in the beginning. This doesn't necessarily, this is set up for what I would share with my 4-H volunteers and how we run a club meeting. But these are kind of the practices that we talked about and different actions you can take. If you want to go through or have a family kind of look at what they currently do, what they want to maybe immediately implement or implement over X number of months. So this is more of just a planning sheet, but it does have everything that we had kind of talked about. So for the instructions for the activity, I'm going to go ahead and read scenario 2. And I'm going to have you guys work through and identify the adult perspective. And the first adult perspective is kind of without considering trauma. So not maybe necessarily because of this training, but think about what you may have thought prior to ever learning about trauma or learning about ACEs. What do you think an adult perspective might be? And then we're going to walk through and have you identify the student perspective. So what could this student be thinking or feeling in this moment? Then we're going to go back and identify the adult perspective, but we're going to consider that trauma-informed lens. So after learning about trauma, what would be your current perspective? And then we're going to look at what needs the child could be expressing through their behavior and what strategies or practices we might consider trying to implement. So we're going to start with our scenario 2, and we're going to talk about James. He's a junior in high school, is consistently in trouble at school. He has a very short fuse and will quickly become aggressive when adults call him out on his behavior and set limits. Jamie is particularly confrontational towards males. At meetings, so in this case, it would be at our 4-H meetings or whatever setting you want to put him in, he is restless and he often challenges the leader during 4-H meetings or the teacher or you, either questioning what they are doing or refusing to participate. From there, things often escalate as Jamie becomes loud, paces around the room, and is eventually ordered to leave the facility. Once outside, he becomes disruptive to others and has a lot of difficulty calming down. So I'm going to give you guys just a couple minutes to kind of think through some of these questions. So again, the adult perspective without considering trauma, kind of that student perspective, what the student could be thinking or feeling, back to the adult perspective, but considering that trauma-informed lens. Think about what needs the child could be expressing through the behavior, and then what strategies or practices you might consider trying to implement. So we'll just give you guys just a couple minutes to kind of work through this. Again, I wouldn't say there's no wrong answer. I'm sure we could all come up with some things that are just completely inappropriate. But in theory, there are no wrong answers. So whatever you think would be for any one of these questions, feel free to write it down or think about it. Again, there's no judgment on what is shared or written. So again, I'll give you guys just a couple minutes to look through this, and then we'll actually have a group discussion. And I'm going to skip the breakout session since there's only a few of us, so we can do it here in the full group. So I'll give you just a couple minutes to work on it. Okay, so when we're looking at the adult perspective, kind of without considering trauma, is there anyone who would like to share?
I put that my first thought without knowing the trauma was that he probably had some sort of anger management issues and then always wanted or needed to be center of attention, whether it was in a positive or negative light.
Perfect. Thank you, Brooke. Yes. So again, back to that willfully disobedient. Maybe he has no respect for adults. Maybe his parents, you can go around and blame his parents. That's, I think, a thing that we have a tendency to do in our industry, is to say, well, his parents didn't do a good job. And a lot of the times then we get to the statement of, he is a bad kid and I don't want or need them in my club, in my classroom, in my setting, whatever it may be. So then how about the student perspective? Does anyone want to share what they may have thought of what Jamie's perspective might be?
That he is unlovable, he's bad, and that he has to protect himself.
Nicole, perfect. Thank you. Those are great answers. Yes. So in a sense, adults are out to get me. I need to hurt them before they hurt me. I feel scared and out of control. No one cares about me. Why should they? I'm not worth it. Or I'm not participating because there's no point. Yes. So those are all examples of trying to protect himself and keep himself safe from the world around him. So then how about now considering a trauma lens? What could be an adult perspective?
He has not learned how to appropriately emotionally regulate. So that's a skill that's lacking, and skills can be taught.
Yes. No, that's great. For sure. So kind of within that brain development, he hasn't been able to practice that regulation. He could also be feeling threatened and unsafe, or he wants attention and doesn't know how to achieve it in a positive way. He's experienced a situation where he's lost trust in adults. So now he doesn't trust adults now. So what needs could this person be expressing, or Jamie could be expressing through his behavior?
Connection.
Yes, perfect. So definitely connection, control. I have to, yes, and safety. Excellent. Yes. So you have to, for him, maybe he has to be in control because he can't trust any adults, or he's frustrated because he doesn't know how to express his feelings, or just treating others the way he was treated because that's what he understands the norm to be. He's scared and sad, or he's trying to numb his emotional pain by creating pain on someone else. And then also kind of having to stay alert, staying alive, to prepare to defend himself at all times because adults aren't there to protect him. So what are maybe some strategies or practices that we could consider trying?
I think just being consistent, like being there, like following through. If you say you're going to be there for a meeting, just do it. Because it sounds like he hasn't had that before. And even with his grandma, she says it's okay for right now, but I don't know how long it's going to be okay for. So he's never had that stability.
Yeah, exactly. Consistency is huge in that.
I would say being proactive and giving him the tools, maybe just building into part of the day with him, taking the deep breaths, doing some grounding, processing with him how to get his needs met in a pro-social appropriate manner.
Mm-hmm. Yes, wonderful. So yeah, maybe he does trust, or we need to work on building that trust, very much so. Maybe offering ways that he can interact with peers in kind of a leadership role, so he can feel like he can control the situation. Allow him to choose not to participate, but provide opportunities where he may engage over time. Avoid shaming and confrontation. Allow him to take a walk and maybe calm down if he would like, depending on the situation. Very much build in those regulation activities. Help him, teach him how he can regulate his own emotions and identify those emotions. Back to providing that consistency, not always being there to help and support. That is definitely huge. And then just the foundational one, you can address hydration and blood sugar, which is important along with everything else here. So we are not going to take a quick break. We're going to power through really quick. But there are a few tools that we want to share with you. And again, it's the same QR code that we just shared with you. Brent, I can hand it over to you.
Sure. So we talked about it, we get some examples earlier in the presentation about the behavior interpretation table. And you can use this guide to help interpret youth behavior, identify how to support the youth. And then there's the example trauma-informed club meeting schedule. And we created this obviously for our 4-H faculty, our 4-H volunteers, with example of how the practices we discussed can be implemented into a 4-H club meeting. But any educator can use this as examples to create a schedule of their own, essentially best practices, so to speak, in creating that structure from a trauma-informed lens to meet kids' needs in those 3 areas we talked about earlier. And then the trauma-informed practice checklist and planning worksheet. This is essentially, you put down currently what you're doing, what you want to implement immediately, what you would like to implement that takes more time or more resources. And then it also has an accountability with check marks, simple accountabilities, and where you are in this journey, this process type thing. And this tool is based on getting further training as part of it, but it is a great starting tool to start the discussion if needed, and to be able to once again keep you slightly accountable, like, hey, this is where I'm at, this is where I'd like to go, and here's where I'd like to go with more resources or more time, and bring others into the conversation and figure out what's going to work, what is practical within, once again, the sandbox you control within this space. Next slide, please.
Then there are some great additional resources. We'll make sure that we get this into the document folder for the Google Drive so that you guys have access to this, since we're going to move through it pretty quick here. But if you're really looking at understanding trauma and its impacts and kind of how to support children, I already mentioned the Connected Child. It was something that Brent and I both read through, learned a lot on how to support. It's meant for for caregivers who are fostering and adopting, but there's a lot that you can pull from to use in your daily work. And then in addition, there's the Empowered to Connect YouTube channel, and there's a lot of great videos by Dr. Karen Purvis. Then there's also The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. Again, that's where we can dig into more of that upstairs, downstairs brain, and how do we integrate both of those. Back to Building Resilience in Children and Teens. I know that that was the group read by Dr. Kenneth Ginsberg. If you have not seen Paper Tigers, please do so. It's kind of in addition to resilience, and hopefully we'll start to see a couple of those trainings come back to Central Florida for Paper Tigers. Also, definitely check out the CDC website, PACE's Connection, watch the resilience film if you haven't. Again, back to reading What Happened to You if you're part of that group read this last year. Also, there's a lot of great information on the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard, and they specifically have a YouTube channel also. And then there's also Childhood Disrupted. That was the common read last year, I believe. And then The Body Keeps Score, and then The Deepest Well, which was 4 years ago. So definitely some great things to look into. We're going to play for you guys just a quick video, and then we'll finish out our session. So let me share that video with you all.
As a kid, I mastered the art of getting kicked out of foster homes. And the fact of the matter is I trusted no one. And looking back, I guess, how could I? From the time my parents left me, to the time another foster kid raped me, to the time I was bullied so bad, I tried to kill myself with a bottle of pills. So I'm sitting in the van, in the driveway of this next home, preparing to meet Rodney and Christine from Yukon, Oklahoma. He looks in my eyes and says, "Son, you can keep causing problems. You can keep trying to mess up. You can keep pushing us away. You can keep trying to get us to kick you out of here, but you've got to get it through your thick head, son. We don't see you as a problem. We see you as an opportunity." You see, every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. March 2015, Harvard's National Scientific Council on the Developing Child released this study saying, and I quote, "Every child who winds up doing well has had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult." My friend and mentor, Reggie Joyner from Atlanta, taught me to think about it this way. In this jar are 936 marbles. Each one of these marbles represents a single week from the birth of a kid until that kid turns 18 years old. You know, a 16-year-old, you got 104 marbles remaining. Right here, we are looking at time. In fact, you're looking at all the time or all of the weeks you have left to influence this kid, or this kid before they turn 18 and begin making critical life decisions without your presence. What matters isn't how much time you have left with a particular kid that you care about. What matters is what you do with that time left. I mean, consider how many weeks Rodney had left when he bailed me out of jail. 26. I was 6 months away from graduating high school. 26 weeks to get through my thick head, my bitterness, my anger, my distrust of adults, to get me to finally accept help. You see, it's not about how much time you have left with that kid you're thinking of. What matters is what we do with that time. If every kid truly is one caring adult, one Rodney away from being a success story, then the challenge is this. The difference between a statistic and a success story is you.
And with that, we want to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you all for being a part of this conference. Thank you all for providing yourselves, your talents, your being open to the roller coaster of emotions, to be the difference in the kids that we interact with in our communities. We hope that we've given you some tools to help you, some things to think about, things that you can adapt and reframe to help your journey and you being the difference in your communities, in your organizations. And once again, Jessica and I are both blessed to be a part of a community like this that have other people just like us in different corners of society trying to make a difference a little bit each day. And being that one caring adult and being that light that can open the door to the brighter future for all of our kids. With that, thank you very much. and enjoy the rest of the conference. One of these slides, if you need to get contact with us, please do so. We are more than happy to help wherever we can. One of the great things about being part of Extension is we're allowed to go everywhere in the state, everywhere in the community. We don't have boundaries. So thank you all again, and greatly appreciate your time and your attention.